Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Angela. So I'm doing this a little early since I'm already out here in the open. I just did my 7 days of tarot day 2 video. So I'm going to go ahead and do my weekly chapter in Memoirs of a Birth Mother by me. You can get this on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's only in book form on Amazon though. For those of you just joining me, I wrote Memoirs of a Birth Mother. I'm reading it a chapter a week on my channel, so you can watch the other chapters on previous. Just go to my channel, and I will post a link below to where you can purchase this book, or at least check it out, get a sample, check it out, see if it's something you want to read. Anyway, we've read 6 chapters so far. We're up to chapter 7, and here I go. Chapter 7. Of all the men in all the universe, or of all the men in all the world in all of the universe, I somehow wound up with the male version of my mother. After the words "I'm pregnant" were uttered, he changed into a completely different person. I watched the man I knew slowly deteriorate into a monster with a pretty face. It all began with just his words. He used them to say things that would slice me to the bone. He knew exactly what to say to hurt me the most. All the times I had confided in him about my past, the issues with my mother, during those times when he was my friend, my lover, he would never now use my very own secrets as ammunition to torture me. Once again, I would hear those old sayings I thought I would never hear again. Nothing I ever did was good enough. Nothing I ever said was right. There were even times when he looked at me as if just the way I breathed was somehow wrong. That first slap sent shockwaves of confusion coursing through me. This was a man I loved. Someone I thought loved me in return. And he had the nerve to hit me. My first thought was, what did I do to deserve this? Already being conditioned by my mother to take a hit and keep my mouth shut, I was upset, but didn't let it show. Of course, he apologized and promised he would never do it again. I wanted to believe him, considering he had been a great boyfriend until now, but maybe the part of me that saw only the things my mother did to me, I somehow knew this was just the beginning. Yes, I should have cut my losses then and there, but I was so blinded by my love for him that I just knew once our daughter was born, all would be well. I still had delusions of grandeur that he would eventually step up and be the man I just knew he was deep, deep down inside. I, of course, was wrong. So this became the new dynamic in my relationship. I would get hit for one thing or another, and he would promise to never do it again. This became the normal for me. Several months into my pregnancy, I was miserable. The rose-colored glasses had finally come off, and I knew exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. He was no longer the man I loved, but a monster that had taken his place. I knew I had to get away from him, but I was stuck with no job, no money, no other place to go. I was well and truly stuck. I'd finally realized he was not heaven sent. Satan was an angel too, you know. He became this person I couldn't recognize, and at this point, I didn't even recognize myself. I spent the entirety of my pregnancy in utter hell. I was terrified he would either simply kill me or worse, that he would succeed in beating the baby out of me, which is what he claimed he was trying to do every time he hit me. Most of my nights were spent alone, as he would go out every night and try to score more pot, or just smoke it with his new friends he had made in this beautiful city. It still amazes me how he was able to pull that off with no money, as he never had a job. I guess drug addicts always find a way. There was a moment in those months when, yes, I blamed my mother. It was all her fault. She was the reason I had picked someone just like her for my very first real relationship. I always felt that this is what I deserve. I don't deserve happiness of any kind. I realized in those months that simply wasn't true. I got angry, and for the first time in my life, I directed my anger at the one person I wanted it to go to. Some memories stay with you forever, and this was one of those times. I called my mother up on a payphone at night, and the pouring rain invented all my 19 years of hurt, anger, hate, and plain old rage. She wound up hanging up on me because for some reason, my mother thinks she was the greatest mother that ever lived. According to her, she just had awful, ungrateful children. In one false statement, she had erased all the beatings I took and the scathing remarks. They just seemed to have slipped her mind. To this day, she will tell you she has no memory of ever beating me until blood ran down my legs from the buckle on the belt she used on me, not the actual belt itself. She will say I'm making this up. What she doesn't seem to understand is the painful reminders left on my body from so long ago contradict her denials. That moment, though, that moment is burned into my mind for eternity. That moment I stood in the pouring rain, bawling my salty tears mixing with the coldness of the rain. That moment I was screaming into the payphone in the pitch dark, blaming her for not making me strong enough to fight against someone like her, blaming her for not loving me enough to know my own worth, blaming her for the choices I made. That was the first time I had ever stood up to her, and in the moment I started to become something, someone else. The moment I was finally free of her hold once and for all. The moment the spell broke and I was no longer afraid of my mother. I was no longer terrified she would come out of the darkness in the driving rain and attack me. It was a moment of pure satisfaction, one I will never forget, no matter how short-lived it was. I can still hear the rain clinking onto the steel phone booth as I stood there smiling like an idiot, with nothing but a dial tone in my ear. I can still smell the rain in the air. Along with my victory that day, there would be many more victories for me, but none will ever compare to that moment, standing in the rain, relinquishing my demons. Later that week, my boyfriend and I were getting into daily fights. He was becoming more and more aggressive, and I just knew I wouldn't leave to see the weekend. Too cowardly to call the cops, I was once again trapped in a hell I couldn't get out of. Terrified of the monster he now was, we got into a huge fight, and this night became the lowest of my lows during my pregnancy. He was screaming at me, and I, for the first time, really began screaming back. I was tired of being bullied, tired of his constant barrage of put-downs, and something inside of me just snapped. As he was screaming in my face, I saw a belt on the dresser out of the corner of my eye. I reached for it as he continued to scream, and the moment my hand closed over the cool leather, my mind went blank. It was as if a searing rage overtook me so hard that I literally blacked out. I become someone else. When I became aware of everything again, he was face down on the bed, and I was beating him within an inch of his life with the belt. He had bloody gashes down his back, and I was suddenly terrified for a whole other reason. I dropped the belt as if it bit me and ran screaming and crying from the apartment. Just a few days before, I'd been relieved to finally tell off the demon that was my mother, and now I came to the sickening realization that I was her. This man that had tortured me, tried to make me miscarry our child, this man that said to me every single day, I will kill you before I let anyone else have you, had turned me into the one other person on this earth I hated. The next night was once again resumed to him leaving all night and not coming back unless he was drunk or high. I, however, was spinning out of control. Heavily pregnant now, I still had no idea how I was going to raise my daughter. I didn't even know if I could raise her without being my mother, and that I refused to do. I was scared and felt utterly alone in this world. I even turned to God, whom I hadn't spoke with in so long. I did ask him why. Why now? Why had he abandoned me now? In a time I needed his love and guidance the most, I had gone outside to the stairs leading up to the apartments above and just looked up at the cool night with the moon hanging so low. I remember it as if it were yesterday. I sat there on those steps and I cried and cried. I cried over everything I'd been going through, the past, the present, my daughter's future. I had no money and her father had completely alienated me from anyone and everyone I knew. It was the first time I had really confronted my feelings about the past with my mother, and more recently, everything that was going on with him. I was devastated, heartbroken even, over the loss of a family I would never have. I began screaming at God, demanding an answer. Why, God? Why, after all these years of heartache and torture, why would you leave me now? Now, when I need you the most? Never expecting an answer, the tears flowed freely, and I hung my head in shame. I sat there for I don't know how long, expecting what I don't know. But then, the most miraculous thing happened. It began to snow. Yes, I know. Snow is not the miracle you think it is, or is it? I lived in a town that never saw snow unless they were in the mountains. If it snowed, that meant the end of the world was here. That is how often it snowed in this town. Plus, it was around April, springtime. There was no possible reason for it to snow in this desert climate, and yet, here it was, as if falling just for me. I looked up into the night sky with its bright, beautiful moon, and I began to cry for a very different reason. I knew in this moment God was there. He had not left me. He had been with me the whole time. I had just been too distracted to listen to him. I felt his warm embrace as he gently wrapped himself around me in a cocoon of love and peace. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I knew without a doubt I wasn't alone. I like to think that the snow is God's tears overseeing me in such pain, and his tears caressed my face. He let me know at that exact moment when I needed him the most, he was still there. This moment gave me the courage to do what I needed to do for my daughter. I did not want the pain of my past or the heartache of my present to affect me any longer. This moment gave me the strength and courage to find her a future. I knew right then with a shocking clarity what I had to do for her, and so began the journey I would take alone to give her a better life. I knew I could never let my mother raise her or even go back to my mother myself. I would have rather died 1,000 deaths than subject my child to her kind of love. My father, on the other hand, was a burnt bridge thanks to the ex, and since he never really wanted to raise me, he too was not an option. There was only one other option, adoption. So right there on the cold steps under the full moon dropped in a sea of black, with the snow falling upon me, I made my decision. I wanted a fresh start for her, away from the ashes of my miserable past and present. I wanted her untouched by the cruelty of it all. She may never fully grasp my reasons, but I hope one day she can accept them. She was, and always will be, one of the 3 loves of my life. I'd walk through fire for any one of my children. I did what I did out of love, and there's nothing better than an act of true love. Just because I am her birth mom doesn't mean I love her any less. I love her with all of me. She's a part of my heart, a part of my soul, and she will be on my mind even when my last breath escapes me. So that was chapter 7. And tune in next week for chapter 8. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you want to see more, please subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification button so you're not missing out on any future chapters. And you guys have a great night.